I'm here to party with America, man. Music is made to bring people together. And that's what we're here to do, man. We're just going to represent the 90s.
I'm Reged Ahmad.
And I'm Jonathan Yerushalmy.
And this is Decoding America, a podcast from Guardian Australia. Well, you probably recognised him, 90s music star Vanilla Ice, in case you didn't. He hasn't cancelled his act, but other artists are icing theirs. Musicians are starting to pull out of America's 250th birthday celebrations, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in America are asking how this fell apart quite so quickly. But there is a silver lining for fans of extreme violence. A signature Ultimate Fighting Championship event is still going ahead in a giant outdoor arena outside the White House.
And it's right at the front door to the White House. And you'll never see it again. It's never happened before, and you'll never see it again. And it's great. And this will be the highest rated event, maybe one of them ever in sports.
Donald Trump's very proud of that. We are going to talk about the UFC match for America's 250th, and it's meant to be for Trump's 80th.
Yes, it's on his birthday.
As well. Interesting, the two going together. That's going to be a theme. We're also going to look at that $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund that's been scrapped and the California governor's primary race taking place as we speak. But first of all, these 250th US anniversary celebrations, are they political or aren't they?
Well, they're not meant to be, are they? So this is the semi-quincentennial. Are you impressed?
I'm impressed because I decided not to pronounce that word.
Yeah, I managed to get it. I've been practicing all morning. They've had 250 years to prepare for this. So I think a lot of people are asking quite how it's gone so wrong. And that issue of whether it is politicized, that's a big question. And it comes down to who you ask, I suppose. Because we know, for instance, that there is this organization, America 250, who is a congressionally approved organization who's meant to be organizing a lot of what's happening around America over the next month or so. But there's also Freedom 250.
Right.
And that is a Trump-approved organization. And that is the organization responsible for organizing this American State Fair, this big outdoor concert on the National Mall that was meant to be happening on the 25th of June. And that's where a lot of the issues seem to have been.
So this is the event where we're seeing musical artists either pulling out of or being asked, like Vanilla Ice, are you still going to attend? Who's pulled out?
I mean, the names on this are incredible. Names that I think most people may not have heard of. And if they have heard of them, probably not for a couple of decades. So the Commodores, Milli Vanilli, Vanilla Ice, you mentioned. And less than 48 hours after a lot of these acts were announced, 7 out of 9 of them had dropped out. And a lot of them had said they didn't even know they were on the ticket for this. They weren't even told. And for those that did know, well, they said that they were concerned that this had become quite a partisan event. They were happy to take part in an event that was commemorating America's 250th, but this was increasingly becoming something that was more of a Trump event.
It's a bit of a confusing picture because I was looking at comments from Bret Michaels, frontman for Poison, another 90s. It's all 90s. Is that
80s and 90s, I
80s
think.
and 90s. I wonder if that was deliberate or a...
I think it's maybe all they could get.
Bret Michaels from Poison, one of the sort of big names, he said his decision is not about politics. So some of them seem to have pulled out but have been reluctant to say exactly why.
Yeah, I think that it has become a very difficult thing. We know, for instance, that a lot of corporate sponsors have had a lot of issues because they don't know whether to support the kind of nonpartisan congressional side of this, the America 250 organization, or to put their money behind Freedom 250, the Donald Trump one. And so it has become a real political issue for a lot of people. And we know, for instance, as well, that, Democrats are saying this has just become all about Trump, that these celebrations were meant to be about America and you've made it all about yourself. And Republicans are really latching onto this because they're able to now say, well, you're just unpatriotic. You don't want to celebrate America. This is the typical political attack lines, but it has become a real partisan wedge.
It's become very conflated and messy. We should say before we move on to how Donald Trump is suggesting it's handled, that Freedom 250 does say that it was non-partisan, the events, and dedicated to uniting Americans around the nation's 250th anniversary. So that's their reply. But Donald Trump has a novel solution.
Yes, he said, instead of having overpriced singers, his words, who nobody wants to hear and whose music he says is boring, he says cancel it. Let's have a Make America Great Again rally. His words, I'm thinking about bringing the number one attraction anywhere in the world, the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and the man who some say is the greatest American in history.
Who might that be?
It's Donald Trump. And this is all part of what The Atlantic magazine is calling Donald Trump's YOLO presidency. YOLO, you only live once, just for some of our older listeners.
Thank you.
And it seems to be he's so focused on his legacy. So he has tied up this whole event, America's 250, into his own presidency. His birthday, his 80th birthday, is in June. There's kind of an overlap there. He's talking about putting himself on a $250 bill. We know he's put his name on the Kennedy Center, even though that's being fought. He wants to build a sort of Arc de Triomphe, the Arc de Trump in Washington. And I think that so much of this celebration is about Donald Trump securing his legacy in really physical, tangible ways that, separate to any kind of policy things or anything to do with the war in Iran or Venezuela. He wants there to be a physical reminder of Donald Trump in Washington long after he's gone. And this is kind of all part of that.
I'm glad you mentioned some of those examples, because it's all being mixed up with remaking Washington, D.C. We've spoken about this before. Resurfacing the Lincoln Memorial is even getting some coins made. Some designs have come out, which you're not supposed to have a living president on a coin. It's sort of against federal law, but that seems to be going ahead. I do wonder, though, there's a lot of history with Donald Trump really courting celebrities and wanting to be embraced by that world. It does feel like this might have hurt.
I think that's such an interesting point. Do you remember after he won in 2024, there was a lot of talk about a vibe shift, that the fact that he won so comprehensively, he won the Electoral College, but he also won the popular vote, and that the Democrats had just been beaten so badly that everyone thought, actually, this is significant of something much wider in our culture, American culture, and frankly, in the world. So you saw kind of this rollback of diversity initiatives at a lot of companies. A lot of companies, I think, said, this is an excuse basically to say, this is not what people want. They want Donald Trump. You saw Donald Trump embraced by tech leaders. They were all front row at his inauguration. And it felt for a time like Donald Trump was actually representative, or at least what he believes in was representative of what most Americans are thinking. And if that was a vibe shift then I think we're seeing a separate vibe shift now. Because if Donald Trump was doing this last year, I think maybe he would be getting some names. I think he would be getting some artists that he wants. I don't think people would be dropping out. But his presidency is on shaky ground. We've talked about this a lot. The economy is hurting. The cost of living is biting. The Iran war is insolvable. And I think what this event is indicative of is maybe how a lot of people don't want to be associated with him right now.
We are going to come to some of those points because there's some interesting evidence that goes to your point. But before we do, I think we do need to talk about that UFC match right out front of the White House, because if we're talking about that very visible conflation of Trump, White House and 250th anniversary, this has got to be one of them. I'm just looking at the picture now. It's like this giant clawed arch being erected, and it's almost as big as the White House. Yeah. Maybe it's bigger. I don't know.
I think it is. It's definitely taller than the White House. I think people need to go online and look at it if they haven't seen it. It's this huge construction on the White House lawn. You can't see the lawn anymore because, as well as the construction of where the cage that they're going to fight in is, there's seating for 4,000 people. There's these huge lighting arches. It's just completely taken over the White House. And it's, obviously for the American 250th, but it's being held on Donald Trump's birthday.
Right.
Meanwhile, CNN is reporting that the Pentagon is offering free tickets to some US service members, but they're also reporting that the tickets will only go to soldiers who meet new military body composition standards. Now, just to explain what that means,
yes,
they're looking at waist and height standards. So they're saying for a maximum of 37-inch waists for the average man and a 35-inch waist for the average woman. Apparently, they just want military members who look good on camera because they know that a lot of people are going to be watching this. And one defense official apparently told CNN, no fatties.
That's a bit offensive and mean.
Outrageous.
It's outrageous, but it also reminds us that it's so much about the Trump administration is image.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, Dana White, president of the UFC, has responded to questions about this, about whether this is a political event. This is what he's had to say.
See the White House fight as political. And why not?
Not at all. No.
Why? Why not?
Well, it's on the birthday of America. I mean, it's the 250th birthday of America. What better place to celebrate it than the White House? And the thing that you have to understand about me is I respect whoever is the president of the United States. It isn't about red or blue or politics for me.
So just very briefly, look, there's real visible symbolism there, the UFC, MAGA and Trump.
Yeah, I think you would be hard-pressed to find any sport in America that's particularly divisive. I think, Americans all love football, they all love college football, they love baseball, they love basketball. This is a sport, UFC, that does seem to cleave along partisan lines. So it's associated with being a Trump sport in a lot of people's minds. I think when pollers ask people about it, they say they see it as more of a Republican sport. And Trump is incredibly close to Dana White. Dana White was, hugely important in getting Trump elected. He spoke at the Republican National Convention in 2024. He helped organize a Fighters Against Socialism tour during the 2024 campaign.
Dana White talks about them being friends.
Yeah, he's known to have dinner with him a lot at the White House. And Trump used the sport and Dana White to reach a lot of younger male voters in 2024. He won that group, which people were quite surprised about. And, it was through podcasts, it was through meeting with comedians, but also the UFC was a big part of that.
Let's come back to that point you're making, that all of this is happening in an environment where Republicans are losing a bit of popularity, as is President Trump. How does that fit in? How do Americans view this? Do they think it's a let them eat cake moment, or is it more nuanced?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are looking at these celebrations and looking at the money that's being spent, and particularly looking at the chaos that is now happening around them, and thinking that Republicans may have slightly overplayed their hand there, particularly the Trump White House, because they just look out of touch, maybe, with a lot of what Americans are feeling. We know that tariffs were biting last year. We know that the inflation caused by the Iran war is hurting. We know that consumer sentiment has fallen off a cliff in America. It's really, really down. And at the same time, Donald Trump is saying, no, there's no problem with this. He's out there saying there is no cost of living crisis. And he keeps pointing to the stock market. The stock market, it is reaching, new highs. Last week, breaking records. And I think the problem is a lot of that is tied up around AI investments. So, for instance, I think AI growth made up for 70% of the growth in the US stock market over the last couple of years. AI companies account for 50% of the value of the S&P 500. It masks a lot of the underlying issues because there is so much investment in AI, but there's so little happening elsewhere.
So I do wonder if all of this discontent has culminated in the news we have today of the administration backpedaling on its $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund. This is Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche just a few hours ago.
The reasons for the fund, I think, it remain as important as they were before, but we are not moving forward with the fund.
Not moving forward ever.
Correct.
Oh.
What do you make of that?
Yeah, so we spoke about this a few weeks ago, didn't we? Mm-hmm. And at the time, we were talking about how Donald Trump had been suing the IRS, the US tax office, over the leaking of some of his tax records going back a while. And it was a very awkward position for the IRS because it's essentially Donald Trump suing his own government. How do they fight their boss in court? And Todd Blanche and people in the Justice Department basically came up with a settlement where they were going to have this $1.776 billion fund, again tied to 1776, America's 250, that was going to pay out victims of federal government overreach. And so a lot of people assume this might be people who had been arrested and caught up in the January 6th Capitol riots. And there was anger. There was a huge amount of anger over that because a lot of Democrats and quite frankly, a lot of Republicans didn't want federal money, taxpayer money going to people who had been arrested for rioting at the Capitol. You know, there was talk about, I know some of those rioters who have since been excused by the president were saying, you know, I'm expecting to receive up to $30 million from this. Incredible. And I think
Doesn't look good.
it just looked terrible. And the Republican senators were saying they weren't going to pass really important legislation for Donald Trump unless something was done about this. And they have now done this. They've rolled back on the fund.
It's really rare for the administration to backpedal, isn't it? Of everything that they've done.
Yeah, I mean,
This is notable.
it is really notable, and I think it shows just how damaging it was. I will note though that within that agreement, it was also agreed that Donald Trump and his family and his companies could never be investigated by the IRS. That was a huge win for him, and that stays.
That's still there.
So nothing is changing there, and there's still a lot of anger about that as well.
I do also wonder about where the Democrats sit in all of this, just briefly, because we've been reading some reporting from The Atlantic. They talk about there's this stubborn economic pessimism. Even though America's very wealthy, there's broad wealth inequality. They coined the term permacession. Where do the Democrats come in terms of capitalizing on this? And are they failing to do that?
Yeah, well, look, they need to have a coherent message. They're expected to do well in the midterms just because Donald Trump is quite so unpopular. But looking ahead to the presidential elections in 2028, they need to come out with a really clear message. And we might talk about that again a bit later. But I think what it's so indicative of is quite what a strange position America is in right now. It's the most powerful country in the world. Yes, the stock market's going great guns. And on the face of it, the economy looks great. But it reminds me a bit of America in 1976, the time of the bicentennial. It was a really bruising period for that country. The Watergate scandal was just a few years earlier. The Vietnam War was still just a few years earlier. Everyone felt very divided and distrustful of their governments. There was, high inflation in the country then. And then just a few years later, it was morning in America again. That's that famous Ronald Reagan campaign ad in 1984.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future.
America was its most optimistic ever, and it felt like the country was finally united again. I think 49 out of 50 states that year voted for Ronald Reagan. It felt like America had captured what had been lost during the 1970s over the Watergate scandal in Vietnam. And I think thinking about the moment that America's in now, at the time of the semi-quincentennial, I think a lot of people are wondering, how do they get that back? And what role do either party play in getting them there?
Before we move on to the break, I should say for balance in terms of presidents making monuments to themselves and changing the face of cities, Obama's presidential library in Chicago is about to open.
Yeah, it's
Lots
huge.
of commentary. It's huge. It's been likened to a Klingon prison. It's near windowless, as described in The Guardian, and it's worth $850 million. So maybe it's not fair to compare the two, but there's definitely
I think it's not fair to
something
compare
be
them
said.
two because every former president has a presidential library. His is maybe a bit more gauche than a lot of them have been. But I don't remember Barack Obama putting his name on the Kennedy Center or running banners of his face down the Justice Department building.
There you go. Well, we'll go to a break, but when we come back, the race is on for California's next governor, replacing the high-profile Gavin Newsom, who's been a bit of a thorn in Trump's side.
We'll be right back.
Well, welcome back, Jonathan. California's governor primary is on. But before we get into why it matters, you found out one of the frontrunners, one of the candidates, Republican Steve Hilton, actually had a character from Armando Iannucci's The Thick of It based on him.
Yeah, so this is Steve Hilton, who actually used to work for David Cameron in Number 10. He's British, very strange person to be running for the governorship of California.
From the former UK Prime Minister now to America.
Exactly. Very, very strange. And Steve Hilton was, incredibly important figure in David Cameron getting elected in 2010. He was known, I think, for making the Tories more electable, making them softer, making their image a bit softer. And he was known as a bit of a guru. And, he used to walk the corridors of Downing Street in bare feet and shorts. And he was a bit alternative and had some wacky kind of ideas. But yes, there's a character in the thick of it, brilliant British sitcom from, a while ago now, that is apparently based on Steve Hilton.
Yeah, I believe in government as a transceiver.
Transceiver?
Yeah, it's really important, yeah, sure, to give out a strong signal, but to be effective, you've got to listen for an echo.
Could you possibly speak in plain English?
Sorry, I thought I was.
That's the character Stuart Pearson. So that's they've based it on him. That's very Yes Prime Minister. I'm wondering how much that character is like Steve Hilton.
Well, look, that is a much kind of maligned character in the show. And we know, for instance, with Steve Hilton, he had a lot of kind of slightly idiosyncratic ideas. So he talked about cutting press offices in the government and just replacing them with blogs. Apparently there was a leak in 2011 that he thought about maybe getting rid of maternity leave to boost growth. And that's kind of like this character in the thick of it, just lots of kind of wacky ideas thrown out there and mocked.
Should we listen to the real Steve Hilton?
Especially my plan to make our state Cal-affordable. $3 gas, cut your electric bill in half, your first $100,000 tax-free.
Cal-affordable. Look, I will leave others to judge how similar he is to his character, but we will come back to the candidates. Why should we care about this race? It's one state.
Yeah, it is just one state, but California is such a big state. It's the fourth biggest economy in the world.
Bigger
California.
than Australia.
Bigger than Australia, bigger than the UK, bigger than India. It is a huge, huge economy, obviously important to America, but important to the world. And it produces really significant national figures. So we know, we've talked about this in the past, the Democrats don't have an opposition leader in the way that we do here in Australia. And so it's kind of a bit of a mess when it comes to going up against Donald Trump. And often, as we've seen with Gavin Newsom, the current governor, the governor of California kind of becomes that role. They become the chief opposition critic of the Trump administration or the Republican administration. And it's just a hugely significant role if you think about the people that have been in governor before. So Ronald Reagan was California governor before he was president. Gavin Newsom is looking at a run for president in 2028. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the last Republican governor of California.
So it is really consequential then, whoever ends up being California governor. But who's actually ahead? Who do we think might win?
Yeah, and it's surprising given how important it is, what a mess this run has been, because there isn't really a clear Democratic frontrunner, and there hasn't been this whole time. There was a period a few months ago when it looked like Steve Hilton, who's a Republican, who has been endorsed by Donald Trump, and another Republican might be the final two candidates going to the runoff because of this very strange electoral system that California has. Now, I think Donald Trump endorsing Steve Hilton has meant that a lot of Republicans are throwing their weight behind him. But for a lot of Democrat voters, and there's, I think, twice as many Democrat voters in California than Republicans, they've been left in position that they don't really know who to support because there are so many candidates. There are 61 candidates running to be governor, and there is a hugely wide open slate of Democrats.
I was surprised that given the high profile that Gavin Newsom has, that there wasn't going to be somebody that Democrats would want to support that is similar to him. But the messiness of this, can we just explain that? They call it like a jungle primary, and it's just crazy. Like everybody's thrown in, all sides of politics, and they all just compete.
Yeah, it's mad. It's an open primary. So we're used to in primary elections in America knowing that there's a Republican primary where voters can select, the one candidate they want to run in the midterms in November, and a Democratic primary where Democrats do the same thing. This is all the candidates thrown in together, independents, Democrats, Republicans, and whoever the top two in this primary are will go to the election.
To the real election.
And it means you could have two Democrats, you could have two Republicans. And I think the reason that this has been quite confusing for a lot of Californian voters is they don't want to end up in a situation with two Republicans, but they don't know who to vote for because they just want to support whoever the front runner is. They don't want to split the vote across too many Democrats. And so we know, for instance, that a lot of mail-in ballots have just not simply been returned until very, very late in the day because voters were waiting to see who might be ahead.
I wonder then if this is a real indictment on how the Democratic Party is campaigning and what they're doing. The fact that they haven't gone, this is our clear favourite, everybody support this person, and this is our clear message.
Yeah, so we are in a situation now where Biden's former health secretary is now looking to be the kind of main runner there. But there's also this billionaire climate activist, Tom Steyer, who is also quite high up. So it could probably be between the two of them. But I think it is a really good point. It is a bit of an indictment on the Democrats that they haven't had this figure to kind of organize themselves around. And if you look at California, Democrats have run it for about 16 years now. It is a very, very blue state. And in that time, petrol prices have risen. Petrol prices are the highest in California of anywhere in America. There is a huge housing crisis there. That has been a big issue during this campaign. And there's a huge homelessness crisis. Anyone that's been to LA or San Francisco will know about that crisis.
Very confronting.
And I think those are really kind of potent attack points for Republicans in this race, but also just nationally. They can say of California, look what happens when it's a one-party state and you just have 16 years of Democrat rule. These issues haven't been addressed, and I think that's going to be really important for who ends up winning this primary.
And in amongst that is the power of Silicon Valley, right? They've poured a lot of money into one particular candidate, Matt Mahan, Democratic candidate. And then Silicon Valley has that strange relationship with Donald Trump and the White House. I don't know how much evidence there is that the Silicon Valley money has made traction, but I wonder if we will see perhaps whether they've made a difference or not.
Yeah, well, one of the big issues is this wealth tax. So in California, there is this proposal to have a wealth tax on some of the richest people there. And it has been hugely divisive. It's actually got quite a lot of support amongst the voters. But you can imagine that the Silicon Valley titans do not want a tax on their wealth, and they're threatening to leave the state, take their companies elsewhere. And so a lot of that money is about kind of trying to influence perhaps what candidates are going to do in regards to that.
So there's loads of vested interests. I guess we'll see results over the coming days. Do you think it's going to take some time?
Yeah, I mean, California is known for counting very, very slowly. And the fact that a lot of these mail-in ballots have taken so long to get back because voters just haven't known who to vote for, I think there's a suggestion that perhaps we won't know the final results, for hours and hours, possibly days.
All right, let's hope that's not famous last words. But this leads us in terms of moving slowly. We're actually off for 2 weeks.
Yes, we are.
We're taking a bit of a break, but we will be back after that. But Jonathan, I really look forward to talking to you then.
Yes, and that's when our listeners can find out who won the California governorship
Maybe we'll even
primaries.
talk about it.
Yeah.